There was a man, not any particular man, mind you, but one you might recognize, maybe even in the mirror. He woke before the sun, pushed through the day, and tumbled into bed long after darkness had settled, only to do it all again. His life, it felt like a relentless conveyor belt, each day a cog in a machine that just ran and ran. He traded his hours, his sweat, his very breath for pieces of paper that barely managed to keep the wolves from the door. Every sunrise brought the promise of another shift, another frantic sprint to stay ahead of, another frantic sprint to stay ahead of the next bill. This was Dale, you see. 48 years old, though he carried the weary burden of a man much older. His world revolved around the clatter and hum of the assembly line at the old gasket factory, a place where the air always tasted of oil and spent metal, and the machines never seemed to quiet, even during lunch breaks. Every morning, the alarm's unforgiving shriek would drag him from a shallow sleep, pulling him towards the harsh, unyielding glare of the factory lights. His body, a weary canvas of aches and strains, groaned in protest even before he'd fully opened his hazel, bloodshot eyes. He swung his legs over the side of the bed, the familiar squeak of the springs a daily soundtrack to his slow ascent. 26 years at the plant, and every morning felt like the first shift all over again, just with more creaks and groans in his joints. He shuffled into the small bathroom, the linoleum cold beneath his bare, heavy feet. The mirror showed a man perpetually tired, his roundish face etched with deep lines around his eyes, a roadmap of worries. Brown hair, thinning on top and receding, was now about 40% gray, a silent testament to the years. He splashed cold water on his face, waking the ruddy, weathered skin, and quickly ran a razor over the scruffy stubble, not for neatness, but just enough to avoid a reprimand from old Mr. Henderson, the foreman. Downstairs, the house was quiet. Sarah, his wife, was usually up before him, a silent whirl of activity getting ready for her part-time job at the diner. Jessica, their oldest, was already at college, her absence a constant ache and a financial drain they struggled to mask. Ethan, their 16-year-old, was still deep in teenage slumber, something Dale envied deeply. He poured himself a mug of lukewarm coffee, black, and scarfed down a piece of toast, barely tasting it. There was no time for contemplation, no moment for a quiet sunrise or a peaceful read of the paper. Time, for Dale, was a direct pipeline to money, and every tick of the clock was either earned or lost. He grabbed his lunchbox, packed with a simple sandwich and an apple, and slung his worn jacket over his shoulder. The old Ford F-150, a reliable but dented 2008 model, sat patiently in the driveway. It was clean, he always made sure of that, but every scratch and ding told a story of hard use and forgotten repairs. He cranked the engine, a familiar rumble vibrating through the cold morning air, and backed out into the still dark working-class neighborhood. The streetlights cast long, weary shadows, and the few other early risers heading to their own posts offered a silent, communal nod of understanding. The drive was short, a familiar blur of half-empty streets and the distant glow of the factory against the pre-dawn sky. His mind, even then, was never fully at ease. He ran through the mental ledger. Jessica's tuition payment due next month, the furnace making that odd clunking sound again, Ethan needing new shoes. Each item a tiny, jagged tooth in the constant grind, threatening to snag his family and drag them under. His quiet ambition, that deep-seated yearning for something more, was buried under layers of bills and obligations, rarely daring to surface. He just needed more hours, always more hours. As he pulled into the factory lot, the harsh, fluorescent lights of the building assaulted his eyes. Inside, the air was thick with the metallic tang of oil and coolant, a smell that had long ago replaced the scent of fresh air in his internal register. He punched his card, the clunk a declaration of another 8, 10, 12 hours traded for a number on a paycheck. His workstation was a familiar beast, a hydraulic press that stamped out heavy-duty gaskets. All day, it was the same rhythm. Grab the sheet of raw material, slide it into place, press the foot pedal, retrieve the newly formed gasket, stack it, repeat. His thick, calloused hands, ingrained with grease and fine scars from years of repetitive work, moved with an almost robotic efficiency. His shoulders ached, his lower back ached, and a dull throb resided permanently behind his eyes. The constant clatter and hum of the surrounding machinery was a cacophony that both deafened and defined his existence. "Hey Dale, you still breathing?" shouted Manny from the next station over, his grin flashing through the grease-streaked air. Dale offered a small, tired smile, a slight sigh escaping him. "Just barely, Manny, just barely." He rarely spoke much, preferring the quiet concentration of his task, the rhythm a numbing balm against the anxieties that gnawed at him. Sometimes a machine would jam, or a batch of material would be faulty, prompting a flurry of frustrated grunts and muttered curses. But mostly, it was just the steady, relentless beat of production. His strength, his unwavering sense of duty and his ability to endure were on full display here day in and day out. Lunch break was a brief, noisy reprieve in the break room, the small talk and instant coffee doing little to truly refresh him. He'd eat his sandwich slowly, staring at the cracked linoleum floor, trying to mentally separate himself from the impending return to the line. But the clock, that relentless keeper of time and wages, was always ticking, always pulling him back. The afternoon shift was always the longest, a slow crawl towards the whistle that would signal the end of his official workday. But often it wasn't the end. Overtime was always needed, always offered, and always taken. A few extra hours meant a few extra dollars, a tiny bit of breathing room against the relentless tide of expenses. He knew what it meant. Less time at home, less time with Ethan, less time for anything but the grind. But what choice did he have? He often thought he wasn't smart enough or special enough to escape these circumstances. This was his lot. When the final whistle blew, echoing like a siren of release and exhaustion, Dale would clean up his station, his body protesting every movement. The drive home was a mirror of the morning commute, only now the streets were filled with other tired faces, illuminated by the orange glow of streetlights. He'd stop at a convenience store sometimes, picking up a gallon of milk or a lottery ticket, a fleeting, desperate hope against the stark reality of his finances. Back home, the quiet order of his modest living room felt like a fragile truce after the industrial chaos. Sarah would be there, perhaps fixing dinner, her own weariness etched into her movements. Ethan might be in his room, lost in his video games or homework. Dale would slump onto his worn armchair, the familiar creak a soft welcome. Dinner was usually a quiet affair, punctuated by the clinking of forks and the occasional question about their day, which Dale would answer slowly, deliberately, his voice thick with fatigue. Evenings were short, maybe a few minutes watching TV or helping Sarah with a chore, but his mind was rarely truly present. He'd often find himself staring at the stack of bills on the kitchen counter, the numbers glaring back at him, an unscalable wall of debt and obligation. The credit card statement, the heating bill, the car insurance, each a testament to his never-ending struggle, a tangible manifestation of being forever one emergency away from drowning. He was stuck, a fish caught in a net made of hours and dollars, constantly swimming, constantly pulling, but never getting free. He traded his moments, his energy, his very life for money, seeing no other path. And as he finally drifted into an exhausted sleep, the hum of the factory seemed to echo in his dreams, a constant reminder of the relentless churn of time for money. Ensued by the clinking of forks and the occasional question about their day, which Dale would answer slowly, deliberately, his voice thick with fatigue. Evenings were short. Maybe a few minutes watching TV or helping Sarah with a chore, but his mind was rarely truly present. He'd often find himself staring at the stack of bills on the kitchen counter, the numbers glaring back at him, an unscalable wall of debt and obligation. The credit card statement, the heating bill, the car insurance, each a testament to his never-ending struggle, a tangible manifestation of being forever one emergency away from drowning. He was stuck, a fish caught in a net made of hours and dollars, constantly swimming, constantly pulling, but never getting free. He traded his moments, his energy, his very life, for money, seeing no other path. And as he finally drifted into an exhausted sleep, the hum of the factory seemed to echo in his dreams, a constant reminder of the relentless churn of time for money. But even sleep wasn't always a refuge. Sometimes in the quiet, gray hours before dawn, when the factory's distant rumble was replaced by the softer creaks and groans of his old house, Dale would lie awake, his bloodshot hazel eyes open to the dim ceiling. This was when the true weight settled on him, not just the physical weariness, but the gnawing ache of what might have been. He thought of Jessica, bright and earnest, trying to make her way through college, burdened by loans he couldn't entirely shoulder, even with all his overtime. He thought of Ethan, quick-witted and restless, growing up too fast, his teenage years slipping by while Dale was punching the clock, missing games, missing conversations, missing the little moments that, in hindsight, were the big ones. A sigh would escape his lips, a slow, heavy release of air that seemed to carry the full measure of his regrets. He'd remember the old Ford Fairlane he'd wanted to restore years ago, back before Sarah and the kids, back when his hands weren't just for turning wrenches on a production line, but for lovingly bringing something old back to life. He'd envisioned a shiny, rumbling beauty, something he'd built with his own 2 hands, something that moved under his command. But the bills had piled up, the hours at the factory swallowed his free time, and the dream had faded, replaced by the grim reality of just keeping the dented F-150 running. He told himself then, and many times since, that he wasn't smart enough for that kind of fancy work, not special enough to start his own thing. He was a factory man, dependable, enduring, but nothing more. That had been his quiet ambition, a workshop of his own, the smell of grease and paint, the satisfaction of making something tangible, complete. He stopped talking about it years ago, even to Sarah. What was the point? It was a luxury for people with spare time, spare money, and a brain for business. He had none of those. The thought would linger, a dull ache behind his eyes, as he finally closed them, hoping for a few more minutes of oblivion before the harsh factory light demanded his presence once more. He was haunted by the feeling of always being behind, always chasing, always just a step away from a better life that perpetually seemed out of reach, convinced that his lot was simply to keep pushing the rock up the hill, day after weary day. His deepest regret was not the money he lacked, but the precious, unrecoverable hours he'd spent in the grind, hours he knew he could never get back, hours that felt stolen from the very fabric of his family's life, from his own unlived dreams. He didn't want $1 billion, he just wanted a little bit of time back, a little bit of control. But how? That was the question that always lingered unanswered in the dark corners of his mind. That question, but how? Was a heavy, suffocating blanket Dale wore day in and day out. It weighed him down as he maneuvered the hulking machinery on the factory floor, a constant, low hum beneath the roar of the presses. It followed him home, a phantom passenger in his dented F-150, settling in the dim corners of his modest living room. He'd try to push it away, to bury it under more hours, more shifts, more exhaustion, but it was always there, a persistent echo. One Tuesday evening, the echo grew louder, sharper. He just dragged himself through the door, the scent of hydraulic fluid and stale coffee still clinging to his work clothes. Sarah was at the kitchen table, a single lamp casting a warm, yet worried glow on her face, illuminating a stack of college forms. Jessica sat opposite her, her young brow furrowed, a laptop screen reflecting a harsh blue light onto her thoughtful face. The air in the usually comforting kitchen was thick with a quiet despair. "Dad," Jessica began, her voice small, "we've gone through everything. Scholarships, loans, my part-time job, there's still a gap. A big one." She gestured helplessly at the papers. "I don't know what else to do. Maybe I should just take a semester off, work full-time for a while." Dale's heart, already a tired, overworked muscle, squeezed tight in his chest. He looked at his daughter, so bright, so full of potential, a future he desperately wanted to lift higher than his own. He looked at Sarah, her eyes mirroring his own fear, the exhaustion of constant worry etched around her mouth. The bloodshot haze in his hazel eyes felt thicker, blurring the edges of the room. He felt his thick, calloused hands, scarred and ingrained with grease, clench involuntarily at his sides. These hands, these strong, capable hands that built and fixed and lifted for 40, 50, 60 hours a week, suddenly felt utterly useless in the face of a tuition bill. "No," he managed, his voice a low rumble. "No, Jess, we'll figure it out. I'll take on more overtime, whatever it takes." The words felt hollow even to him. More overtime, more hours given, more life traded. The same answer, always the same answer, and it never truly solved anything, just postponed the drowning. The harsh glare of the factory lights flashed in his mind, a vivid counterpoint to the soft glow of the kitchen lamp, reminding him of the suffocating trap he was in. Later that week, the second crack formed. Ethan, his 16-year-old son, was always a quiet boy, but lately he'd become almost a ghost in the house. Dale would come home, exhausted, and Ethan would be holed up in his room or out with friends. One Saturday morning, Dale found himself in his garage, attempting to fix a perpetually leaky faucet on the utility sink, the familiar smell of oil and rust a momentary comfort. He heard the faint strum of Ethan's old guitar from the open window of his room, a quiet melody one Dale didn't recognize. He paused, wrench in hand, listening. He realized he hadn't heard Ethan play properly in months. He hadn't asked about his classes, hadn't sat down for a real conversation that didn't revolve around chores or homework. He hadn't seen his son, not really, in so long. just like he hadn't seen the sun rise outside the factory gates or felt the unhurried warmth of a morning at home. The hours stolen from them, suddenly felt like a physical absence, a gaping void in the fabric of his family. His perpetual weariness morphed into a different kind of ache, a burning frustration that tightened his gut, heavier than any physical exertion. He was trading his life for a meager existence, and in the process, he was losing the very things he was working so hard to protect. The how wasn't just about money anymore, it was about time. His time, their time. That afternoon, Dale was out in the small, overgrown patch of grass he called a front yard, wrestling with a particularly stubborn patch of weeds. The sun, a rare golden orb in the often gray skies of their working-class neighborhood, cast long shadows. Next door, old Mr. Henderson, a man Dale had always considered lucky, retired, always puttering around his immaculate garden, never seeming rushed, was trimming a rose bush. Henderson wasn't rich by any means, lived in a house similar to Dale's, but he always had a quiet contentment about him. "Rough one, Dale?" Mr. Henderson called over, a gentle smile on his weathered face. Dale grunted, pulling a particularly tenacious root. "Always a rough one, Mr. Henderson. Seems like the faster I work, the more problems pop up. Kids, house, bills, feels like I'm running just to stay in place." He paused, leaning on the rake, a sigh escaping him. "Jessica's college. Had to promise her more overtime. Just feels like there's never enough." He rarely talked like this, but the past few days had worn him raw. Mr. Henderson nodded slowly, his movements deliberate, his eyes thoughtful. He snipped another dead rose. "Funny thing about time, Dale," he said, his voice soft, almost a whisper against the hum of the afternoon. "Most folks, they just spend it like water. They wake up and they let the day happen to them. Trade an hour for a buck, another hour for a chore, another for watching the TV." He turned, his gaze meeting Dale's tired, bloodshot eyes. "But some folks, the ones who seem to have it all figured out, they treat time like it's solid gold. Not just asterisk their asterisk gold, but everybody's asterisk gold. And they figure out how to make it work for them, even if they ain't got much of the paper kind." He wasn't lecturing. He was just stating an observation, a quiet truth he'd learned over years. "You know, when I was younger," Henderson continued, pruning another stem with practiced ease, "I thought success was about working more, breaking your back. Took me a long time to realize it was about working different, about what you asterisk choose to do with those 24 hours, not just how many you sell." The words, so simple, so understated, hit Dale with the force of a physical blow. They weren't about a get-rich-quick scheme or some grand, impossible plan. They were about asterisk choice asterisk, about control. Not the control of a billionaire with endless resources, but the control of a man with 24 hours just like everyone else. The how? That had always felt like a heavy wall, suddenly seemed to shimmer, revealing a tiny, almost imperceptible crack. A sliver of golden light, not the harsh glare of the factory, but something warmer, more intentional, seemed to penetrate the gloom of his perpetually tired mind. For the first time, Dale didn't just hear the words. He felt them, resonating deep within that hidden resilience, that quiet ambition he rarely admitted. He didn't know what Mr. Henderson truly meant yet, but a seed, fragile and new, had been planted in the fertile ground of his deepest regret. He just had to figure out how to water it. The sliver of golden light, not the harsh glare of the factory, but something warmer, more intentional, seemed to penetrate the gloom of his perpetually tired mind. For the first time, Dale didn't just hear the words. He felt them, resonating deep within that hidden resilience, that quiet ambition he rarely admitted. But the world, as it always did, kept turning. The plant whistle still blew at 6 a.m., the bills still piled up, and the ache in his knees still reminded him of every hour he'd stood on concrete. That night, after a double shift that stretched his body thin and left his mind buzzing with a dull ache, Dale found himself staring at the ceiling at 3 a.m. Sarah was a soft murmur of breathing beside him, the kids deep in their sleep down the hall. The house was quiet, save for the hum of the refrigerator and the groan of old pipes, and in that profound silence, the thoughts that usually stayed shoved down under the day's tasks clawed their way to the surface. He rolled onto his back, the worn mattress groaning under his 260 pounds. His hazel eyes, usually bloodshot from the grime and fatigue of the factory, now just reflected the faint glow from the digital clock radio. 3:17. Another night. Another long, long night. His thick, calloused hands, stained with ingrained grease and crisscrossed with fine scars from years of working the line, lay heavy on his chest. They were good hands, strong hands, hands that had provided for his family for 25 years. But lately they felt empty, like they were just going through the motions, a machine themselves, part of a bigger machine that spun him round and round with no end in sight. What had his life become? He asked himself the question often, usually in snatched moments of quiet, but never with this stark, unforgiving honesty. It was the same answer every time. A cycle. Work, pay bills, work more, pay more bills, try to save a little, fail, worry, repeat. He was always chasing the next paycheck, chasing the rising cost of groceries, chasing the feeling of not being perpetually behind. Jessica's college tuition was a mountain, not a hill. He was working every extra hour he could get, picking up shifts others didn't want, sacrificing sleep and the few precious hours he might have seen Ethan before the boy vanished into his teenage world of headphones and homework. He saw the struggle in Jessica's eyes too, the way she tried to hide her worry about money, picking up extra hours at the campus diner instead of focusing on her studies. It tore at him, a dull, constant ache behind his ribs. A sigh escaped him, deep and slow, stirring the thinning brown hair on his head, now streaked with more gray than brown. He wasn't supposed to be here, not like this. He remembered the eager young man he'd been, fresh out of high school, full of quiet plans. He told Sarah shyly that he wanted to build something for them. Not a mansion, just comfort, security, a life where they didn't have to check the bank account before buying new school shoes. He hadn't dared dream bigger than that. But comfort felt further away now than it ever had. His biggest fear, the one he never spoke aloud, not even to Sarah, was that this was asterisk it. That he wasn't smart enough, not special enough, as his old man used to say, to escape. He saw other guys at the plant, older than him, their faces etched with the same weary resignation, their bodies bent under the same weight. Was that his future? Was he just another cog, destined to grind away until his joints gave out, leaving his kids to inherit the same uphill struggle? The thought was a cold, bitter knot in his gut, heavier than any weight he lifted at work. He closed his eyes, the deep lines around them seemingly deepening further in the darkness. But even in this abyss of fear, a tiny, almost imperceptible spark flickered. It was Mr. Henderson's words turning over and over in his mind. It ain't about just selling your hours, Dale. It's about investing your hours. What did that even mean for a guy like him? He didn't have stocks or bonds or fancy business degrees. He just had his two hands and the endless demand for his time. Yet a secret hope, a tiny ember he'd long tried to extinguish, began to glow. A hope that maybe, just maybe, there was a different way. A way to build something that wasn't just a bigger pile of bills. A way to reclaim some of that precious, irreplaceable time. Not for a yacht or a fancy car, but for a quiet afternoon with Ethan, or to watch Jessica graduate without a cloud of debt hanging over her head. He wanted to look at Sarah and see something other than shared worry in her tired eyes. He wanted to feel like he was moving forward, even if it was just a crawl instead of constantly treading water. He wanted to feel like he had a choice, even a small one, in how his days unfolded. He wasn't sure how, not yet. But as the first faint hint of pre-dawn gray began to seep through the bedroom window, painting the world in colors of 4F5 D75 and A9 A9 A9, Dale knew one thing for certain. He couldn't keep going on like this. The seed, though tiny, had taken root, and he was going to find out how to water it one way or another. The steel blue light of the pre-dawn didn't just illuminate the room. It seemed to press down on Dale, heavy as the morning shift. He lay there for a long minute, listening to Sarah's even breathing beside him, the quiet hum of the old refrigerator in the kitchen. Usually this was the time he mentally braced himself for the day, for the grease and the noise and the relentless pace of the line. But today, something was different. The gears in his own head, usually just grinding along, had caught on something. A familiar knot of worry tightened in his gut, right alongside the usual indigestion. Jessica's college tuition. Another payment due next month, and they were already stretched thin. He picked up an extra Saturday shift again, leaving Ethan to fend for himself with frozen dinners and his mother's tired instructions to just keep busy. The boy was growing up, disappearing into his headphones, and Dale felt like he was watching it happen from a mile away, through a dirty window. His calloused hands, ingrained with years of oil and steel filings, clenched silently beneath the worn blanket. He thought of his own hands, how they were a map of every repetitive motion, every small cut and scrape that built up to a lifetime. Was this it? Just more of the same until the body finally gave out. He pushed himself up, the springs in the old mattress groaning in protest, a sound as familiar as his own sigh. He moved through the quiet house, each step a heavy thud on the worn carpet. In the bathroom, the harsh fluorescent light, so different from the warm, intentional glow of the sunrise he often missed, reflected his tired face in the mirror. Hazel eyes, bloodshot. Deep lines around them like ancient riverbeds. Scruffy stubble, a thinning patch on top of his graying brown hair. He splashed cold water on his face, feeling the familiar sting, but it did little to rouse the fog in his mind. This wasn't just about money, he realized as he fumbled for his worn work clothes. It was about time. He was trading his life hour by hour for barely enough to stand still. He was a machine, clocking in, clocking out, only to find the treadmill had sped up again overnight. What was it old Mr. Henderson, the neighbor, had said last week when Dale was fixing his fence, hinting at it over a lukewarm coffee? Something about how people think about time. He hadn't really paid attention then, just nodded, eager to get back to the fence, to the asterisk doing. But the words, vague as they were, had lodged themselves somewhere deep. As he laced up his heavy work boots, the leather creaking, a quiet resolve settled over him, heavier than any tool belt. It wasn't an angry outburst, no slamming of doors or shouted declarations. It was a deep, silent decision that resonated in the core of his being. He couldn't go on like this. Enough. The word wasn't spoken, but it echoed in his mind, firm and unyielding. Enough of the constant worry, enough of the exhaustion that seeped into his bones, enough of watching his life slip by, unchosen, unlived. He didn't have a plan. He didn't have a clue asterisk how he was going to change it. He was a factory worker, not some fancy businessman. His intelligence, he always figured, was good enough for the line, for troubleshooting a broken machine, but not for something grand, for escaping the gravity of his circumstances. He wasn't special. But as he stood in the dim kitchen, waiting for the coffee to brew, looking out at the faint promise of the coming day through the window, a spark ignited. A quiet, stubborn fire in his chest. He didn't know what asterisk to do, but he knew, with a certainty that surprised him, that he had asterisk to do asterisk something. The path he was on, the path of trading every precious minute for $1, was leading him nowhere he wanted to be. He had to find a different way to use the time he had. He had to. The quiet certainty in his chest settled in, heavy and unfamiliar, like a new tool in his worn toolbox. He thought about old Mr. Henderson, the neighbor who always seemed to have a bit of extra spring in his step, even in his 70s. Mr. Henderson, with his neat little garden and the way he'd nod sagely sometimes, had once said, "It ain't about how much time you got, Dale, it's about what you asterisk do with the bits you snatch for yourself. Most folks just let the day happen to 'em. Some folks, they make the day happen." Dale had always figured Mr. Henderson was just lucky, born with a knack for calm. But now, standing there, the notion of asterisk snatching time felt like a revelation. His days weren't happening asterisk to him, he was letting them. He was asterisk spending his time like loose change, hoping it'd be enough. Billionaires didn't spend their money like loose change. They invested. And that was it. That was the spark. He didn't have money to invest, not really, but he had time. Scraps of it, sure, but time nonetheless. He had to invest his time. His first investment wasn't in some grand scheme. It was in the simplest, most brutal commodity, sleep, or rather the asterisk lack of it for a few precious moments. He decided right then and there that tomorrow he wouldn't let the alarm clock be his only master. He would set it for 4:30 a.m., an hour earlier than usual. An hour he would snatch back from the creeping exhaustion, an hour he would claim for himself before the factory whistle even thought about blowing. What would he do with that hour? He had no idea. Maybe just sit in the quiet. Maybe read one of Jessica's old textbooks, something about economics she'd left on the coffee table. He knew it wouldn't be easy. His body was a creature of habit, groaning under the weight of his 260 pounds and the perpetual drag of fatigue. But the thought of Jessica's worried frown, of Ethan's missed games, was a hook in his gut, pulling him forward. The next morning arrived with a vengeance. The alarm, a cheap digital clock with glowing red numbers, screamed its insistent demand at 4:30 a.m. Outside, the world was a canvas of deep, indifferent charcoal gray, still steeped in the raw, cold breath of dawn. Inside, Dale's small bedroom was a cave of reluctant warmth. His wife, Sarah, stirred beside him, a soft murmur escaping her lips before she settled back into slumber. He envied her that easy sleep. His eyelids felt like lead weights. Every muscle in his body screamed for another hour, just 20 more minutes, even 10. The pillow seemed to fuse to his head, the mattress a soft, insistent embrace. A voice, familiar and insidious, whispered in his ear, "What's the point, Dale? You're just gonna be more tired on the line. 1 hour ain't gonna change anything. Go back to sleep. Be sensible. You ain't smart enough for this, you're just a factory man." It was a powerful voice when he'd listened to his whole life, the kind that kept a man in his place, comfortable in his discomfort. He closed his eyes, the image of Jessica's hopeful, tired face flickering behind his eyelids, her textbooks piled high on her small dorm room desk. He heard Ethan's distant, booming laugh from a memory of a backyard barbecue he'd missed, working a double. And then the quiet, knowing smile of Mr. Henderson, the neighbor, as he'd said, "It ain't about what you got Dale. It's about what you do with what little you got, particularly your time." With a groan that felt ripped from the very foundations of his weary bones, Dale threw off the worn quilt. The cold air hit his bare arms, a sharp, unwelcome shock. He sat on the edge of the bed for a full minute, head in his calloused hands, the deep lines around his eyes creasing even further. The silence of the house pressed in, a heavy blanket. He forced himself up, each movement an act of defiance against the gravity of his own exhaustion. He stumbled to the small kitchen, the yellowed linoleum cold beneath his feet, and put on the coffee. The harsh glow of the refrigerator light spilled across the counter, illuminating the faded floral pattern of the wallpaper. He drank his coffee black, staring out the window at the deepening gray, not yet dawn, just that in-between time. What did billionaires do at this hour? Probably not stare at a chipped mug, wondering if they were crazy. Day 3. The insidious voice was back, stronger now, a venomous whisper. "See, Dale, you're still tired, even more tired. What good is this doing? You think reading some dusty old book for an hour is gonna pay Jessica's tuition? You're just making yourself miserable for nothing. Go back to your bed, man. You earned it." His hazel eyes were even more bloodshot this morning, the ruddy skin of his face looking paler under the fluorescent hum of the kitchen light. He felt an ache deep in his gut, not hunger, but a gnawing doubt. He had pulled out a book from the library the day before, something about basic economics, Mr. Henderson's recommendation. He opened it, the pages feeling heavy in his thick, scarred hands. The words swam before his eyes. He read a paragraph, then reread it, his mind drifting to the grease stains on his work uniform, the endless clatter of the assembly line. He didn't absorb a thing. He just sat there, the book a meaningless prop, until the house stirred and he had to get ready for his shift. He hadn't done anything with his hour, not really. But he hadn't gone back to sleep. That, he told himself, was something. A flicker of resilience, like a worn-out work glove that still had grip. Day 7. A week had passed, 7 consecutive mornings of waking up before the sun, before Sarah, before the kids. The exhaustion was a constant companion now, a heavy cloak he couldn't shake. His body felt like a perpetual knot of tension. He tried to be productive, to read, to plan, but some mornings, the old habits pulled with an almost physical force. This particular morning, the rain was lashing against the windows of his small bedroom, a dreary, relentless drumming that seemed to mock his efforts. The alarm buzzed at 4:30 a.m., and for the first time, Dale didn't just hesitate, he actively fought it. He slammed a calloused hand down on the snooze button. The blessed silence that followed was a temporary reprieve, a soft, warm hug from the mattress. Just 10 more minutes, he rationalized, his voice rough with sleep. What's 10 minutes gonna hurt? 10 minutes turned into 20, then 30. He drifted, half asleep, dreaming of the warmth of oblivion. The guilt began to prick at him even in his semi-conscious state, a tiny pinprick against the blissful lethargy. He pictured Mr. Henderson's kind, crinkled eyes and felt a flush of shame. He hadn't told anyone he was doing this, but somehow just the thought of the neighbor knowing he'd failed, knowing he'd given up, was enough to stir him. With a jolt, he sat upright, his bloodshot eyes flying open. It was 5:15 a.m., an hour wasted. The morning's dedicated time was gone. A deep sigh escaped him, the kind that came from the very bottom of his soul. He had failed. A wave of resignation washed over him, that familiar feeling of being not smart enough, not strong enough. But then a different thought pushed through. All right, Dale, you messed up. Now what? You gonna let one bad morning define it? Or are you gonna try again tomorrow? He dragged himself out of bed, the weight of his 260 pounds feeling heavier than usual. He wouldn't get that hour back, but he wouldn't let it derail him completely. He would start again, even if it meant fighting the same battle every single day. That was his strength, after all, his ability to endure. His sense of duty to himself, to Jessica and Ethan, wouldn't let him quit that easily. Day 14, 2 weeks. 14 sunrises he'd seen from his kitchen window, coffee in hand, trying to wrestle some meaning out of an hour that used to be solely dedicated to dreaming of more sleep. The sheer physical weariness was still there, a constant dull throb in his temples, but something else had begun to shift, subtly, imperceptibly. The insidious voice had changed its tune. It wasn't just about exhaustion anymore. Now it questioned the asterisk point. What have you got to show for it, Dale? 2 weeks and you're still just a factory man. Bills are still piling up. Jessica still needs tuition money. You're just sacrificing sleep for nothing. This ain't working, see? He stood in his small, tidy garage, the air thick with the smell of old oil and sawdust, the harsh fluorescent bulb overhead casting long, stark shadows. He started using some of his early morning hour to organize a corner of the garage, clearing out old junk, making space. He wasn't building anything yet, not really. But he was planning. He started sketching out ideas in a cheap notebook, simple wooden shelves for Sarah's potted plants, a small repair project for the F-150's sputtering heater, even a vague notion of fixing up old furniture to sell, just to bring in a little extra. His thick, calloused hands, ingrained with grease and fine scars, were usually busy with the heavy machinery at work, but now they were carefully sorting through old tools, wiping them clean, arranging